Hey everybody, this is a huge bucket list item for me. I get to interview somebody who's inspired me to create my mission and really push through. I couldn't figure out a better way to celebrate the 100th episode than to be here with none other than Tom Bilyeu.
What's up, man?
Thank you so much for hosting me here. This is, as I mentioned, a huge bucket list item. I mean, going back to the beginning when you started Inside Quest, it really propelled me to kind of relook at what I was doing in my life and my mission forward. So thank you.
Dude, my pleasure. And thank you. You've been so active in the community from the jump. So I'm very, very grateful.
It's my pleasure. The first thing that I really wanted to dig into, you talk a lot about your background as being in the king of remedial jobs.
Yeah.
And you now have gone through 3 different companies. You had the tech startup, which was all about money. Like that was your focus. That was everything you did. Then you went on to a mission-focused company with Inside Quest. And now you're on to an impact-driven company that you get to run with your wife, which has to be awesome. And I got to be honest, the relationship theory episode where she called you out for just trying to help when all she wanted to do is relax. I get in trouble for that all the time. What have you learned as you've progressed through each of those businesses?
Wow. That is an enormous question. So in the beginning, it was really business lessons. I was learning how to run a business, and that really shouldn't be brushed past. And one of the things in the world now where being an entrepreneur is so cool and it's like being a rock star. And I mean, it's really so fascinating to see how things have changed because that was not the case when I was growing up in the 80s. So I had to learn how to run a business. And those are some of the most important lessons that continue to echo through. And all the mindset stuff is really powerful. But if you don't know how to run a business, then it's all going to be for naught. If you want to be an entrepreneur, right? So obviously, if you have other things, then that is going to be infinitely less important. But that was huge for me because I wanted to actually run a business. So, and I never want to forget that that was a brutal learning curve to figure this stuff out. And I'm not a born entrepreneur. And so going through that was really, really important. In that, and unfortunately, nothing is as clean as the storytelling would like it to be. In that same time, while I'm learning about business and I'm figuring that stuff out, I'm also realizing some very hard truths about myself, especially in the first company. What I built my self-esteem around wasn't making any sense. And so that was one of the most critical lessons that I learned at Awareness Tech was what I said I wanted was to get rich, but the way that I was acting was that I just wanted to feel good about myself. And that was a critical shift. So going from trying to be right, identifying myself as being good and valuable because I was smart, and invariably you're going to meet people that are smarter than you. And I was working with these 2 guys that were way smarter than me. And so it's just this constant sort of torture chamber of not feeling adequate. And so switching my self-esteem around to being the learner, identifying the right answer faster than anybody else, being willing to admit when I was wrong, it was a huge lesson. And then the last, most important one that I learned at Awareness Tech was that chasing money just wasn't that motivating for me. And that isn't that it isn't motivating. It was very powerful and it remains a motivator for me today. But I think that there are 5 things that really motivate people. And usually money is sort of dead last. It's on the list, don't get me wrong. But it's last. And so purpose and meaning and significance, like those were way more motivating for me. And then something that I didn't really ever put words around then was camaraderie. And that's a huge part of why I founded the company with my wife. Just working together, building something together is really, really a lot of fun. What I learned at Quest is too legion to even fit in a book, but some of the main things, the difference between being a leader and a manager, that was really, really important. How to scale something, that was eye-opening to say the least. Learning about talk about business lessons, like understanding cash flow and how to deal with that. And that growth is actually wildly problematic, which I did not understand. I never understood why people said that. And then when you're growing and you realize that there's this time delay between when you have to invest, say in ingredients, and when you actually collect the money from what you just invested in is a distressingly long period of time. And vision, social media going into Quest was an idea I had, but I didn't know how to do it. So getting into that, learning about that, building community, seeing that if you're really trying to create value for people, that comes back 1,000-fold. And the reason that we did Quest was really just a reaction to chasing money. So it was like, got so fed up with that emotionally, right? I was fed up of chasing money emotionally, wanted to do something that made me feel significant, that made me feel connected to people, that was tied to a mission, that let me ignite my passions, like all of that stuff. But I didn't know if it was going to be good for business. And it really was, you have to see me as being somewhat like almost spiteful of, I've just spent all these years chasing money and I'm so pissed about it. And I feel like I've sold those years of my life cheaply that now I'm just going to go in the opposite direction. I'm going to like focus on value. I'm not going to worry about what's more profitable. And it doesn't mean that we threw business sense out the window. We didn't, but the driver became really truly about that community, about delivering value, doing the hard things for them, being of service. And then to see that we ended up making more money in a single day than we made annually at the company where all we did was focus on what was more profitable was eye-opening in the extreme. And now impact theory is really about scaling community, about looking at how do you leverage relationships on a grand scale to enact a business. So building something that when people read about it, they think that this is a nonprofit. And to take something that has the ethos of a nonprofit, but is a for-profit machine, like what does that look like? And really balancing that. And that has been utterly fascinating. It's easy when you just set out and it's a business like any other. It's really actually more difficult when you say, okay, the mission of this company is to pull people out of the matrix, right? Which isn't intrinsically tied to any product. So now how do you productize it? That's been really fun to grapple with.
There were 3 interviews that I constantly listened to, and it was Naveen Jain, David Horton, and Jeff Hoffman. And in those, they talk about the importance of profitability, especially in Naveen Jain's episode when he talks about the women's shelter and people's focus on profit to create change and be able to reinvest. How are you dealing with that now? I mean, you just talked about the struggle it is, but have you been able to make an impact with other businesses and help them pivot into understanding the importance of profitability not being a not-for-profit?
Well, I think the best example of that was just, you had the same 3 people that did awareness technologies, that did Quest Nutrition, and they could not be more different in both outcome, in style, in everything. So that is the best example of internalizing these lessons, learning something, and then saying, okay, now we're going to do something differently. Have I had that kind of impact on other companies? I hope so. I don't know that that's true, so I won't plant a flag in that. But we hear from people all the time that have watched the content, listened to it, and been really, really moved by it, and hopefully it's continued to echo through their businesses. But that really was the biggest that I can point to in my own life and say that that was a major shift. Going into impact theory and finding ways to productize that, it really comes down to what's the problem that you're trying to solve and asking what's the no BS answer to solving that problem. So I started there. So, that goes back to just learning business, good business principles, figuring that stuff out. And one of the ways that we're crossing that hurdle of understanding that people first encounter me usually socially. So they're encountering the message before they're encountering the business. And so how do you help them make that transition? And the strategy that we're using now is just over communication, letting people know, from the day that we launched, it was on the website. This is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, exactly what we're going to do, that we're here to make money, that's the only way to make something a self-sustaining economic engine. And on top of that, I am still motivated by money. It's not my primary driver, but make no mistake, I personally also want to enrich my life. I just make the demand that I do it in service of other people.
Now, speaking in service of other people, one of the things that amazed me about how you made that transition into Quest, you talked about some of the early staff there and giving people that second chance, hiring those people who most people wouldn't hire. Why did you do that?
Man, that was really selfish. So if you look, humans are incredibly powerful machinery, to use just like a nice metaphor there. And I was looking at these people that I thought were wildly undervalued by society, which is great for me, right? It means that I can get them for a discount. So I'm in this phase where we have no money coming in. I can't afford to hire people that have proven their value, and so they're very expensive. So I'm in this conundrum. I need amazing people, but I need them to be undervalued. And how do I find that? And so we were in the middle of the inner cities, and I remember this all started with this one kid. He was 19 at the time that we hired him. Oh my God, it's crazy. And he was like, recently had just finished a court battle because he almost went to prison for attempted murder. Now, he didn't do it, but he refused to rat. He knew who did it. He actually saw them do it. And he couldn't say who it was because they would kill his family. Yeah. And so first of all, think about that for a second, right? That just wasn't real in my life. Like, I never had to worry about something like that. If I saw somebody attempt a crime and they were blaming me, I'd have been like, it was them. And so I was very impressed with this kid's fortitude. He was 19 years old, scrawny as the day is long, and was just like more than prepared to go to prison to protect his family. And I was like, whoa. And then I just got the chills. And then on top of that, like, this is a kid that was a hair's breadth away from actually being convicted. And then that would have destroyed his whole life. So I'm thinking, wait a second, it's way too fine of a line for this kid to have either ended up in jail or not ended up in jail. And then he would bring people in and he would say, no, this guy's a good dude. He's been to prison, but he's a good dude. And you'd meet him and be like, wow, this guy's really pretty sharp. Like, I'm really impressed. And so once I met enough of those guys where I was like, this is actually really interesting. These are incredibly powerful individuals whose society is totally discarded. They can't get a job. So they are so hungry to prove themselves, to do something of value, to not be put in that box, that then I just put out the notice to the streets, in essence. And I said, look, tell anybody and everybody that we'll hire regardless of criminal past. And then people lined up around, like it was a parking lot, so it wasn't technically around the block, but they would literally be in a line outside the door. And then it just became, look, there are realities to be faced of, if you've been to prison, you're probably a pretty tough nut. If you grew up on the streets, like, so there was all this like alpha energy, and I had to make sure that I could handle that and make sure that everybody understood, like, there's one leader and everybody has to fall in line to get this done or it's not going to work. But it just ended up being incredible. And so this concept of mining for astronauts came to mind, and I thought, you know, hiding in the inner cities, regardless of whether you've been to jail or not, that's sort of irrelevant. Hiding in the inner cities are human beings, and human beings fall on a bell curve of intelligence, drive, will, all of it, right? So they've all got the raw materials to be turned into something, and it just comes down to mindset. And so could I give them that mindset? Could I find the ones that were really going to be willing to put in that work, to grow, to learn, all of that? And then could I infect them with an empowering mindset? And it just worked unbelievably well.
Do you attribute that to the success of Quest?
No. That helped us get going, and so that was really huge, and it was right at the time. But let me tell you, there was a time where the dragon began eating its own tail, because we had all these young hustlers, and they were hungry, but they were wildly undereducated in the ways of manufacturing. And so it helped us get somewhere, because I needed people that were going to be there at Friday on a 2 a.m. that were going to follow me. They were going to be inspired by me. They were literally going to be willing to bleed for me. And that was massive and exactly what we needed in the beginning. But then over time, I felt so loyal to them that it started holding us back. And so that became like a real moment of, all right, this is still a fucking business, and we've got to run a business. And so we had to make some really hard choices, and that was brutally difficult. And very few, I'll say probably less than 10% of like those hardcore do or die hustlers are still at the company. And that's just the reality, man. At some point you need professional managers, and if the people haven't been rapidly acquiring an advanced skill set, and some of them did, and some of them just learned so fast, and they were willing to put in so much time and energy that they got good at their job. You know what I mean? Not just like good at mindset, but like actually you have a skill set that is monetizable. So, but it was definitely less, far less than the majority.
You mentioned there's something about mindset, and I think when we first connected, it was a quote and a story you told about like taking extreme ownership. And the quote you said was, "It's your fault." I mean, you drove it down in the story about it, you know, if an asteroid fault, you put yourself there in that time frame. How did you attribute that level of mindset and that level of ownership to where you are today and as you progress through the journey?
Yeah, to me, it is the only path to success. You don't find people that achieve a high level of success that at some point didn't just go, yeah, I'm going to take ownership for everything. it is literally the only thing that makes sense. Because even if it's not true, it keeps you in the mental framework of there is something I can do differently in the future. There was something I could have done differently in the past. And I don't say that to beat myself up. I'm not sitting there punishing myself for something, because that won't serve you. But remembering that you can always do something differently. When you hit a current obstacle and you feel that impulse to stop, wait a second, I know there is a solution here. And having that belief that it's all my fault keeps you in a solution-oriented mindset. That's it. And so if you can stay in that solution-oriented mindset, you're so much farther ahead of everybody else who is willing to accept that there are things outside of their control. Which, by the way, secret of secrets, there are things outside of your control, but it doesn't do you any good to think about that, because you will inevitably draw the line way far from the truth. So you'll stop here because you're like, there are just some things I can't control. When in reality, it may be, and I'm not kidding, 200 or 300% farther than where you thought you could go. So I would rather be absurd and really think I can do everything, including stopping asteroids from hitting my wife, which was the story that you alluded to. And even though I get it, there are certain things that are outside of my control. That's far smaller than the number of things that I can control.
I know you're involved with the X Prize Foundation. And I have to be honest, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Diamandis and the work they're doing. How is your growth in mindset and starting to see that extra 300% and going past that line? How has that contributed to being involved in such an awesome organization?
That's interesting. You'd almost have to ask Peter, because if he hadn't invited me to be a part of it. But yeah, Peter has that mindset. He has Peter's laws, which I highly encourage everybody to look those up. And I'm sure you can just drop them into Google. And it's very similar to the belief system that I wrote out. And it's things like, it's all your fault. You're always in control. There's always something you can do. Human potential is limitless. I mean, it's all those things, right? You find that successful people, like they're not going to use the same words, but they share a very, very similar belief system. And so, yeah, I mean, I think in many ways, Peter reacted to me, to my mindset, and to my success, quite frankly. And if I hadn't had a certain level of success, I don't think he would have been interested. And I do believe that the success is a direct reflection of the mindset, for sure.
Now, one of the things that amazes me is the level of depth and how willingness you are to share your time. I mean, when you interview somebody, you go so deep and produce probably the most epic intros I've ever heard. I think every guest says that when they start. Why?
It's the only way to be good. And I really believe at the end of the day, if you want to, so I care about playing on a world stage, and not everybody does. I really recognize that. I care very much about that. To me, the very purpose of life is to find out how many skills you can acquire that have utility, and then actually put that utility to the test in service of something bigger than yourself, right? So for me, the thing I have chosen is I want to pull people out of the matrix, which is another way of saying I want to help end limiting belief systems, because I believe the world just gets fundamentally more interesting when more people have an empowered belief system. So that's very meaningful to me. I want to play on a world stage. I want to do things at scale. To do that, there is only one path, and that is to get so good people can't ignore you. Now, the easiest way to do it, and I won't say it's the only way, but the easiest way to do that is to work obscenely hard, to just outwork everybody. I don't yet know how to control raw intelligence. Maybe there's a way, but I certainly don't know it. So for me, just throwing muscle at it, like outworking people, so I really, really like magic. And I'm going to give away the reality of every trick for you right now. What makes every magic trick work, and it's always the same. Every one of them comes down to the magician works so hard to get that trick to seem seamless that you'd rather believe that he can bend the laws of physics than to accept that he's worked as hard as he has to make it seem seamless. And some of it is engineering, and they hire the best engineers on the planet to create these illusions, which is unreal. And then at the sleight of hand level, it's not 10,000 hours of practice. It's 20, 30, 40,000 of hours. It's so insane how much time they put into this stuff. And so I probably, when DVDs were a thing, I probably had 30 magic DVDs. I mean, it's crazy. And every one of them is like over and over and over. You just have to practice it over and over. It's unreal. So that's why I do it. And it gets those reactions from the guests. And honestly, when I started interviewing, no one knew who I was. Everyone thought it was stupid that a guy that built a protein bar company thought that he had something to say about mindset. So I knew that I had to differentiate myself. And I told the team, there are a few times in life where the pressure is on and you get a chance to show up. I will not fail you. I will show up every time. And the guest will sit, because keep in mind this, I'm the talent, man. Other people, my wife built this set. My wife is one of the producers of the show. We have a showrunner. We've got somebody that books. It's like they tell me, I mean, look, okay, I guide the who we're going to have on the show for sure, but then they execute this whole beast. So it is very important to me to show leadership and never let anyone on this team outwork me, and that they need to know that they can rely on me. That's really, really important to me. So I just knew if I'm ever underprepared and I let them down, I'm not going to be able to get the best in the world to help me build this show. So to sum it up, extraordinary performance is the only thing that works. And the only way that I know to get an extraordinary performance is to work extraordinarily hard.
Now, you and I had a chance to talk a little bit about jitters before you started, and like the first episode you did. How did you switch your mindset to be in that performance stage where you're like, I have to show up for my team and just kind of push those jitters down and execute? Because you nailed it on the first episode, even though you may have been nervous.
Well, you think I nailed it on the first episode, but you've never seen the first episode because it never aired. The first episode, and some people have hit me up when I say that, and they say, oh, well, you're the learner. Like, why don't you let us see that? And in honesty, the reason that episode got buried is it's guest protective. I didn't know how to select guests, and I couldn't get bigger guests. And he just didn't know. The cameras were very hard for him. And I was terrible and didn't know how to help him through that. So through my own inadequacies, he ended up looking bad. And I didn't want to do that. So we let that one go. Then the second episode that we recorded, I recorded it twice. And so you saw the second one. And I remember doing that episode, and I didn't know how to interview. And so I'm doing what every other interviewer does. And I'm asking all the questions you would expect an interviewer to ask. And halfway through the episode, I'm bored out of my mind. And I thought, oh my God, like I can't justify this. Because this is like now people are really starting to understand, at least at the fringes, they're starting to understand personal branding. They're starting to understand a CEO stepping forward. They did not understand that when I first started doing it. So there was so much external pressure. Everybody thought I was stupid and out of my mind. And so I'm like, if I'm going to drag everybody through this and show what awaits on the other side, I can't be bored. Like, I've got to believe in this. And in the first, so we filmed for like an hour. And in that first hour, I was bored. And I thought, this interview is not interesting. And either I just stop this now and never do another one of these, which, hey, fine, I learned, right? Or I do something radically different and I'm going to start trusting my instincts. And that was when I really started to get good as an interviewer. And not like that exact moment, but the more and more I trusted my instincts, the better and better I got. And so literally wrap up, I do my outro, which back then was very different. I do my outro. Thank you so much for coming on, all that. We're done, yeah? Okay. And I turned to the guest and I said, are you willing to do this one more time with me? Because I'm deeply dissatisfied with my performance and I think I can do better. And he was like, sure, man, like, let's do it. And so we started, hey, everybody, welcome to another episode, like the whole nine, and went through the whole thing. And this time I asked the questions I actually gave a shit about. And pushed when I thought he needed to be pushed, and injected myself, which in the beginning, while I hardly do it now, like I am way more silent than I used to be, but that was a big part of like me really investing and getting into it and finding my voice and all of that. So it was important, even though looking back on it now, did not make for as good of an interview as I think I'm capable of today, but I didn't, yeah, anyway. So that was the process. So how did I push down the jitters? Not very well. So let's start with that. And it was super nerve-wracking. Cameras made me very uncomfortable. I still get nervous to this day, especially if I'm speaking in front of a live audience. If I'm giving a live talk, 100% right before they announce me, you will find me meditating. Because I'm just trying to get out of that fight or flight mode where my heart rate is escalating. And that, comes from understanding neuroanatomy, understanding sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, and practicing alternating between the two. And so, yeah, just using all those tricks.
You talk a lot about learning and taking action, like actually putting it to practice. And the whole reason I started the show was to inspire people to find that passion and take action. Because I think a lot of people sit back on the ideas they have and they don't do anything. When did you get to those aha moments or those inflection points where you were like, I have to go this different direction and do something? Like, how do you identify that and actually get the courage to take the step?
For me, it's almost always been a reaction to being absolutely emotionally distressed. And so I wish that I were smart enough to see it coming intellectually, but I've always had to find myself in some horrifying emotional position. It happened to me at the end of college. It happened to me again at Awareness Technologies. It's these big sort of emotionally catastrophic moments where I don't feel like I have anything else to lose because I'm so unhappy. And because I'm so unhappy, I'm prepared to do something just radically different because I have to shake out of this feeling. And those have been the huge turning points in my life. It's either slip into a depression or change everything.
You've interviewed some awesome guests, like people who are literally changing the world. Have there been any consistent themes or anything specific in one interview that stood out that you really clung to and has helped change the direction?
Well, there are radical consistencies, and it is the reason I started Inside Quest was I wanted to show my team, which is originally why it was called Inside Quest. I wanted to show the people inside Quest that this belief system that I had written, you're going to hear it from more people than just me. And so I wrote it. It was 25 bullet points, which actually, if you guys are interested, you can go to impacttheory.com. You can download the belief system there. And it was me saying, what did I do to change my mind to go from broke, not very good employee to being able to build $1 billion business, changing my life financially, all of that? What did I actually do? And so I wrote them down. And my big fear when I gave them to the team was that people would memorize them and they wouldn't live them. And that's exactly what started to happen. And so people, like, I don't know what bullet point 13 is to this day. And I don't know what 12 is, or 11, or 14 for that matter. Because memorizing them is irrelevant. Like, you need to live them. Like, they need to so be a core part of who you are that it just is you. It is your identity. It is your belief system. It's how you think. It's the filter through which you run everything. So I wanted to bring on successful people so that they could hear, this isn't just me. Don't just memorize them. Think of listen to these people give you the same information from 1,000 different angles. And so, sight unseen, these people would come in, they didn't know who I was, they didn't know the belief system, and through a certain style of questioning, they would end up saying things that were resonant with the 25 bullet points. And so that was incredible to see. And it's, beliefs about like whether or not you're in control, whether it's your fault, whether we have the potential to grow and to change, and all of those things that are like, hey, you're an individual with potential power. You're not necessarily an individual currently with power. And how do we actuate that potential? What does it take? And so hearing so many different people that have been insanely successful say, I used to think I couldn't do something and now I realize I can. And this is the method by which we get there.
How do they take the learning and put it into action?
Well, this is one of the few things where, because I absolutely hate it when people can't explain like the how, what's, and whys. But the reality is when it boils down to taking action, like you just have to do it. So at some point it becomes, you have the choice to sit there and not do it, to play video games, to watch TV, to whatever. And you're going to decide instead of that, I'm going to do this thing, right? And normally, like the sort of baseline thing that gives people momentum is the fear they're not going to be able to pay their rent and eat. And if you can get beyond that and get to the point where you have a compelling future, it's something that's exciting, that's pulling you through, you've changed your belief system enough that you believe that it's possible that your efforts are actually going to make you better, make you capable of more, and then most importantly, if you change your identity to be congruent with somebody who takes those actions, because behavior is driven by identity, period. So if you don't like a behavior in your life, then you need to change the identity. But at the end of the day, it's all going to boil down to you either take that action that moves you towards your goals or you don't.
Now, before we get to the final question, what's the best people to participate and join you on this journey?
It's interesting. I consider myself a filter. I used to believe that anybody could do it. And the truth is, if They had a support system around them that was willing to put in the time and energy that it takes to very slowly thaw somebody from a fixed mindset and help them get into a growth mindset. It probably is possible for anybody, but without putting that kind of just 360-degree effort, which unfortunately I haven't yet cracked that nut. In fact, impact theory is my best guess as to how to get people who've never encountered an empowering mindset, or even people who are antagonistic to an empowering mindset, how to get them to really make that change. But when I talk about impact theory, I'm talking like 70 years, 80 years, multi-generation. Like that's the only way I can think of where it will actually work on anybody. So for now, the kind of person is somebody who has this sense that their life can be more, that they're capable of more, that they want to be more, and they're willing to work to make it happen. That's all I need. Like if they just have that haunting suspicion, from there it's like, now just encounter the mindset. Now, if you encounter it and you reject it, fine, fair enough. But if you encounter it, open yourself up to being changed, and really put in the work to leverage the brain's ability to change, which does not happen for free. Like you actually have to put in the work, repetition, all that. But anybody that fits that paradigm, I don't care what your background, your ethnicity, your sex, none of it matters. It's all, do you have a sneaking suspicion that you could do more and be more? And if you do, then hopefully I can bring you the parade of people and ideas that are going to help you actually do something about it.
The final question I have for you today is, what is the one piece of advice that you can give people to find happiness in their pursuit?
Man, to me, that really comes down to you have to develop a passion. So fulfillment, which is what I think you mean by happiness. So a bowl of ice cream is going to give you happiness, but it's pretty fleeting. So if you want lasting happiness, fulfillment, I think that really boils down to a fairly simple formula, and it's what the ancient Greeks called techne. So you get so good at something that has utility, that is usable in some way. Think about a doctor, right? Incredibly usable skill set. And it acts in service of somebody else. So when you do that, when you work your ass off to get a set of skills, so it isn't just ladling soup at a soup kitchen, which I'll equate to like a bowl of ice cream. It does make you feel good, but it's very passing. Whereas if you worked really hard, and there's an awesome example of Toyota used to go in and their employees would come in and they would ladle soup and they would help people and they felt good, but there was this lingering sense of like, this isn't really the thing that we're great at. So instead what they did, they employed technique. They came in and they showed the soup kitchen how to be more efficient so that they could feed more people. And I forget the percentage increase, but it was crazy, like 300% or something. I mean, they just radically transformed that soup kitchen. That's technique, man. That's where you feel good. And you see like that soup kitchen is working so much better and so many more people are touched by it and you bring so much more joy and you feed more people. It's like, that's where you go, whoa. These skills that I've worked really hard for are now really paying off. Now, what does it take to get those skills? That takes looking inward and seeing areas that are just interests, which is how a passion starts as a minor interest. And you choose to develop it into something. And that goes like this. You have a minor area of interest. You engage with it. And then that becomes either a fascination or it doesn't. If it doesn't, you move on to the next thing. And you find some area of interest that the more you do it, the more you're fascinated by it, the more you want to do more. Then you go from fascination through a process of really gaining mastery, getting so good you can't be ignored. Now that process is very difficult, involves a lot of boredom, a lot of hours, a lot of really hard work, right? So if you think of a musician who wants to be truly one of the greatest in the world, you're gonna play the same scales over and over and over and over until you get to the point where, like Bruce Lee said, you kick until you no longer think kick, you just kick. And that's how somebody gets great at playing an instrument. There's so much like physicality to it, to be able to just have that mind-body connection, to understand the notes so well that you don't have to think about them. They're just there when you reach for them, like on a subconscious level, so that you can truly emote through the instrument. So putting in that kind of hard work requires that it was something that you really began to fall in love with the more that you engaged with it. So start with that idea, or that interest, which requires that you just encounter a lot of stuff. Find one that through engaging with it becomes a fascination, and then find one that you are so interested in and is so compelling, the idea of being great at that thing, that it pulls you through the boredom and the hard times. And if it acts in service of not only yourself but other people, you will find happiness in that pursuit.
Tom, this was insane. I couldn't have had a better way to celebrate the 100th episode. Thanks for joining me today.
Dude, I'm insanely honored to be your 100th episode. So
thank you. And everybody, go to douglasjfoley.com/100. You'll get all of the articles and episodes that I mentioned today, and check out Impact Theory. It changed my life massively, and I know it's going to make an impact for you. So everybody, thank you for joining me. I will have the recording up in a couple days. So thanks again, and thank you, Tom.
Thanks, man. It's an honor.
Awesome. Thank you.